Nintendo has a really weird history with the shoot 'em up genre. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, they jumped on the Space Invaders and Galaxian trends, creating games like Space Fever, Hellfire, and Space Firebird. And the last of this kind of game they created was Radar Scope. That game didn't do that well, but they had created a surplus of cabinets, so they decided to convert some of those cabinets into a different game about some guy with a mustache who got his girlfriend kidnapped by a gorilla or something. I don't know. After seeing massive success with that game, Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. Basically completely shifted the industry away from focusing on shooters as the biggest genre, as platformers became the big thing. So Nintendo's biggest successes at this point came from replacing spots previously held by shoot 'em ups with platform games. They pretty much never touched the genre again until 1990 when they released one for the Game Boy called Solar Striker. But we'll get there. I want to illustrate this weird relationship Nintendo had with the genre a little bit more because I find it fascinating and it goes undiscussed. Because what began happening shortly after the release of Solar Striker in 1990 would end up making Nintendo's relationship with the genre far more complicated than it was before. Shortly after the release of the Super Famicom in 1990, it received its first shoot 'em up, Konami's Gradius 3. This game brought back that complicated relationship between Nintendo and the genre, as Gradius 3 became infamous for its slowdown, something shoot 'em ups on competing platforms didn't really suffer with all that much. But this wasn't just a fluke, as a few months later, Super R-Type, another arcade game ported to the Super Famicom, released, and also suffered from extreme slowdown. And after this, most shoot 'em ups on the system had exhibited signs of extreme slowdown to varying degrees, and the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo had gained a reputation for being a bad platform for shoot 'em ups and even action games on the whole, as it was much more well known for its slower paced games, particularly RPGs. People rationalized it by saying that this issue existed because the Super's main CPU was slower than those of the PC Engine and Mega Drive, which had built up reputations for being good platforms for shoot 'em ups. Now, I can't speak on the technical reasoning for this, but the idea that the Super Nintendo is bad at action games, I think, is complete horse chocolate. Just look at games like Super Alesta, aka Space Megaforce. There's lots of stuff on screen moving at a pretty quick pace. In fact, the president and founder of Compile, the company that made the game, Masamitsu Mitani, basically harshly stated in a 1993 interview that he thought the problem with shoot 'em ups on the Super Famicom was solely an issue with the developers making them, and this game definitely proves his point. It's not a late life title either. It first came out in April of 1992, only a year and a half after the Super Famicom initially came out, so I'd consider it an early title. The NES and Famicom was never considered a bad platform for shoot 'em ups, obviously not during its early days, but it was still able to keep up with the games of the late 1980s and early 1990s with games like Gunnak and Rekka, and its CPU runs at half the speed of the Super's. It's clear that the developers just weren't putting in their best efforts on the Super. Now, there's some people who say that slowdown makes these games easier because you have more time to react, and I both agree and disagree. It is helpful when the game is consistently slow, but when the game decides to speed up again, that's when it becomes a problem. Even then, I think people are being unfair and exaggerating when they say the Super sucked at action games. The Super Nintendo does have good shoot 'em ups, even with the slowdown. In fact, I like Gradius Triple, and it's definitely better than the arcade version. But aside from that, If the Super Nintendo is bad at action games, how come it has loads of what are considered some of the best action games of all time? With that being said, the reputation the system picked up for the shoot-'em-up conversions and underwhelming arcade ports like Final Fight, which came out the same day as Gradius 3, seemingly drove arcade developers away from it and onto other systems that had better support for them. In fact, throughout its total library of over 1,700 games, only around 85 of them are arcade ports. Yes, I've checked, and yes, I need to put that knowledge to more use in the future. But Nintendo's poor relationship with the shoot-'em-up genre was even worse on the following Nintendo 64. It had the most meager selection of entries in the genre, while its competitors had much better support for it. It seemed at this time Nintendo really didn't want to be associated with anything that could be seen as legacy on the Nintendo 64, and with R&D 3 at the helm of the N64, who infamously prioritized the Western market over everything, they prioritized the taste of the majority of the Western market who felt similarly. By the way, the Sega Saturn sold a little bit better than the Nintendo 64 in Japan. I wonder why. The only real arcade-style games on the N64 are the occasional fighting game and arcade-style racing game, and shoot-'em-ups and JRPGs, the two genres that had literally moved units for their previous two consoles in Japan, as people bought the system specifically for those games, and both of which are typically Japanese, were basically non-existent on the system. And Nintendo heavily damaged their relationship with companies like Square and Namco beforehand, who made games like that. I actually like Nintendo 64 games, but good God, its library is extremely one-dimensional because of this. That being said, 4 months after the Super Famicom's release, a massive blow was dealt to the shoot-'em-up genre's popularity when Street Fighter II came out. And fighting games became the big thing in arcades, and so it was already slowly dying out and becoming more niche during the years of the Super, and especially the N64. So that's also a huge factor in why they were barely supported with those kinds of games. But the point still stands that Nintendo was losing the grip it had on arcade developers during the NES era, during the Super era, and especially the N64 era. And by the end of it, the shoot-'em-up genre was basically mostly trapped below the underground niche gaming circles at this point, where it mostly remains to this day. Nintendo never really made any other shoot-'em-ups after Solar Striker, only occasionally including shoot-'em-up mini-games in their bigger games, like a sequel to Space Fever that was included as a mini-game with the Game Boy camera. The one exception, to my knowledge, was a 2009 DSiWare game developed by Audica called Metal Torrent. What is this, a tutorial on what not to do with Nintendo games? It's clearly more of an Audica game than a Nintendo one that they just helped out with by publishing, and only a DSiWare release and not a full major title like Solar Striker, so I don't think it's quite as special or significant as Solar Striker. That doesn't mean I couldn't give it its own shine in the spotlight one day though. Now, I know some people are going to say the Star Fox games count as shoot-'em-ups, and if you think they do, fine. But personally, I think they're definitely their own thing. I consider Space Harrier style rail shooters to be shoot-'em-ups because they basically are just 3D third-person shoot-'em-ups, but Star Fox style rail shooters have a lot more going on and kind of just do their own thing that strays far away from the roots of the STG genre, so I wouldn't consider Star Fox to be Nintendo's shoot-'em-up series. So with all that being said, their 1990 Game Boy shoot-'em-up Solar Striker remains an anomaly. Not only is it one of Nintendo's very few shoot-'em-ups, it's easily their most successful venture into the genre, selling 1 million copies at the time. Remember, at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that's practically the equivalent of 10 million today. Yet, no one really talks about this game anymore. Why is that? Well, I wanted to see why for myself. Let's dive in. So, there's not much to the development of this game. It was created as a collaboration between Nintendo's R&D1 and Minakuchi Engineering, a developer who I'm quite fond of and have talked about at length before, probably most well known for their work on some Mega Man games. Solar Striker was one of 2 games that Minakuchi made alongside R&D1, the other being Kicks. Yeah, Taito licensed the game out to have its Game Boy port developed and published by Nintendo for whatever reason. I really love this version of Kicks. It has such an ominous vibe. It's really creepy with the sound effects. And then you see something like this. R&D1 had previously experimented with shoot-'em-up gameplay on the system the previous year in Super Mario Land's 2, 3, and 4-3 stages. So they at least had a little experience working with this type of gameplay on the system. It's speculated that the reason Solar Striker was made was simply because Nintendo saw a gap in the library that nobody else was filling and thus decided to support it with a shoot-'em-up themselves. Literally less than a month later, Konami released Nemesis for the system. When it comes to the Game Boy's reputation for shoot-'em-ups, it's not exemplary, but its entries into the genre are fairly fondly remembered compared to Nintendo's home consoles in the 1990s. There's some highly regarded games on there like ZOS, though I personally haven't been able to get into that one. When it comes to cut content, all Solar Striker really has, as far as I know, is an interesting Stage 0 that can be accessed with external codes featuring a cutscene of this giant spacecraft that loops indefinitely. The game itself first released in Japan on January 26, 1990. For context, the same day that DuckTales was released for the Famicom a few months after its NES release, and Solar Striker would later arrive in North America and Europe in the same year. It, along with the developer duo's other game, Kicks, which released a few months later, were both promoted in the 4th and final volume of the Super Mario Land manga series meant to promote Game Boy games. Released July 17, 1990. It contains walkthroughs and story comics for both, and the story comic for Solar Striker follows Mario and Peach's descendants from the future piloting the Solar Striker to fight off the game's villains, who are apparently revealed in a twist at the end to be led by Bowser, before being sent back in time to meet their ancestors. Yeah, it's weird. I really wish more people knew about it. So, is this game technically canon to the Mario universe? What is the plot of this game? Well, the North American manual's plot description, which, don't worry, is completely faithful to the Japanese one, reads as follows. It is now the year 2159. Earth has been attacked by forces from the planet Reticulon. Several hundred years ago, Reticulon sent messages conveying their intent to attack. The Earth Federation government was formed, unifying the whole world. The Earth would be protected by the Federation army. Unfortunately, the power of the aggressive Reticulon forces proved to be too much for the Federation army. Earth was subjected to a crushing defeat. There is one last chance. The Federation army has a secret megabase on the moon. Here, the Earth's finest scientists and technicians have developed an ultra-performance fighter ship. The name of this fighter is Solar Striker. The only way to foil the blah blah blah. Yeah, it's pretty generic stuff. At least Sapphire tried. That being said, the manual doesn't say anything about Mario and Peach's descendants not being the pilots of the Solar Strikers, so I'm gonna pretend they are. Spoilers though, Reticulon isn't led by Bowser. Now let's get into the game proper. When you start, you're met with this title screen with ominous music and a slick logo that also appears on the Japanese box art that was replaced with this more generic but it's still a cool one for the Western releases. Weirdly, there's no demo mode in this game. The music here is excellent, and the main theme for stages 1 and 2 is pretty memorable. It's one of the classic Game Boy tunes. When it comes to the visual presentation, I'm obviously using the default Game Boy Color palette to avoid hurting your eyes too much. And I actually really like this palette, as I feel it suits the game's visual design a lot. That being said, the visual design here is good, but it's painfully generic. One of the biggest untrue stereotypes that shoot 'em ups have to deal with is the idea that they all look the same. And that's extremely untrue. Games that may look generic on the surface have their own distinct visual identities. Solar Striker really doesn't though, but it's still a pretty good looking game, and it's not like there isn't any creativity in the designs here, but it's not shocking that this game never got a sequel. Like I said though, the default Game Boy Color palette for this game adds a lot of flavor. A strong color scheme can give a shoot 'em up lots of identity. Once you enter the game, you're thrown right into the action, given about 2 seconds before your first basic wave of popcorn enemies start coming at you. The gameplay here is pretty simple. You move with the D-pad and both buttons shoot. The game has a sort of auto fire, so you won't really hurt yourself playing this one, but it's kind of a style auto fire. You can already tell from the first 10 seconds of gameplay what audience Nintendo was aiming for, and it makes perfect sense for what is Nintendo's shoot 'em up, a very casual audience. Despite that, that doesn't mean this game isn't difficult. Like most shoot 'em ups from this time, you die in one hit, and there's not a whole lot forgiving about that except that you immediately respawn, which wasn't quite the norm yet when this game released, but would come to be soon after. And you don't lose your weapon completely, but simply power down 2 levels. You still lose a life though, and there are no continues. Like most shoot 'em ups though, you can gain an extra life from getting a certain amount of points. The most complex thing in this game is the power-up system, but even then it's still pretty straightforward, but not really. This is really the game's most questionable piece of design. So every time you pick up a weapon pickup icon, which are pretty scarce in this game, in fact I counted there's only 30, you gain an extra shot. The next time you pick one up, your rate of fire increases. Not by much though, obviously it's a Game Boy game. Then, when you pick another one up, you gain an extra shot, but your rate of fire is slowed, so you have to pick another one up to increase your rate of fire again. It's pretty stupid and there's no reason it should be designed that way. But there's 7 levels of fire until you're fully upgraded, which the final 2 levels give you 2 big missiles. After that, anytime you pick them up, you just get points. Yeah, I don't know why the power-up systems consistently have to be the biggest problem with these kinds of games. Really, there should have only been 4 levels of fire, all at the same speed. It definitely would have made the scarcity of the pickups more justifiable. Despite this, upgrading your weapons really doesn't make much of a difference, but I still recommend you do it because, well, you can. Now these aren't major experience ruining problems, but they're pretty dumb design decisions. That being said, while I was researching for this review, I wanted to find anything online I could about this game, considering there genuinely isn't a whole lot out there about it, despite, selling 1 million copies in the 1990s. Another weird detail about this game is that it scrolls horizontally, yet it doesn't take advantage of that space on a gameplay level. I wonder if this was implemented for some kind of testing purposes. This kind of stuff doesn't bother me, but it bothers a lot of other people for some reason. When it comes to level design, the enemy patterns here are extremely basic. However, once again, this kind of plays into the market this game is aimed for. It doesn't feel patronizing, they offer a basic challenge, but it's still engaging despite that. There's no real trial and error here. As soon as you see an enemy, just start following the pattern. Anyways, The first stage takes place in outer space and aims to introduce you to the basic mechanics of the game, so it plays things pretty safe and doesn't bombard you with too much difficulty. At the end you reach the boss, and matching the basicness of the presentation and enemy patterns are its simple and basic attack patterns. Get rid of it and move on to the next stage. Stage 2 is the first stage where you have the chance to be fully powered up in this game's 6 stages. Yeah, the scarcity of the power-up capsules kinda sucks, and once again, I think they should have just kept it to 4 levels of the ship instead of 7. This is where you enter the Reticulon planet's atmosphere. It's also the shortest stage in the game. The boss here is weirdly easier than the first boss, as you can destroy its projectiles. While it does charge down to the bottom of the screen, it's fairly well telegraphed if you have quick reaction times and nothing good maneuvering can't handle. Stage 3 sees you entering a city. The enemies start getting a little harder here, as you have these tanks that take more than one hit to take down, and the patterns are a little more interesting and more likely to throw you off. The boss here is where I have to tell you something fascinating about this game. The bosses time out after a while, and because the enemy patterns are so basic, that makes it entirely possible to do a pacifist run of the game until the final boss. But the game itself really doesn't recognize or give you anything for this like a game like Ikaruga does. But it does keep this game, with its super basic enemy patterns, from becoming too stale. Also, games that allow you to do at least a 99% pacifist run are a lot rarer than people think. The reason I bring it up here is because I let this boss go. It's too much of a pain to actually try to get a hit in, but there's this spot in the corner where you can just break it and it can't hit you no matter what. Yeah, it kinda sucks, and it does take a bit for bosses to time out, but you'll probably want a break from all of the non-stop action, and you'll probably want to do anything to not get a game over with the lack of continues. Sure, you can get points from beating the boss, but I don't think it's worth it, as it's not enough to push you that much closer to an extra life. But you do you. Stage 4 takes place over a canyon. There's actually a mini-boss here before the real boss. Not much to say about it, but this is when the game gets really difficult, as the enemies are really hard to take down. The boss here shakes the screen when you hit it, and it's really annoying, so once again, I'd recommend becoming Gandhi during this fight. That is, if you even can. And they say bullet hells didn't exist until Batsugan. Yeah, right. Stage 5 takes place in what seems to be the Reticulon base. The enemies here are extremely difficult, especially these fireball thingies, and if you want a real challenge, try to destroy all of them. This boss also does the shaking thing. That's annoying. Stage 6, which is the final stage, seems to be the creepy biological level that these games usually have. It's the longest level, and I will admit it drags on a little. Despite this stage is actually a little bit easier than stage 5. After a short boss rush, you reach the final boss, which is this thing. It also shakes the screen. That is very annoying, and you don't have a choice but to defeat it, so give it everything you've got. After this, you get a pretty basic ending and credits before the game loops with a hard mode, and oh my lord, this is a true Super Nintendo experience. But yeah, that's Solar Striker. The biggest thing that's holding this game back is that it's too basic. For a Nintendo game, it really lacks that Nintendo charm. It looks like a game anybody could have made. I get what they were going for with the gameplay at least, but I wish the presentation wasn't so generic. I see bits of charm in there trying to come out. But regardless, what do I think of the game on the whole? Despite all of my criticisms, I really like this game. The stage design can feel so basic it's almost robotic at times. The power-up system kind of sucks, but other than that, I think the simplicity works in its favor. It's simple enough to get substantial playtime out of casual players, and it's difficult enough to be worth at least checking out for hardcore players. And I fall somewhere in the middle. I enjoy this game, but I'll probably never pick it up again, so take that for what it's worth. That being said, I did expect to slam this game for not having good replay value because of its super basic robotic design. But upon replaying it for this video, I actually think this game has a lot of replay value. Outside of a regular run, you can challenge yourself further by not only going for the basic no power-up run and this game's special pacifist run, but also going for a perfect run is pretty difficult as well, and you have the second loop if you really want a challenge. It's also one of those games that I would say is fair, not full on trial and error, but it's definitely based more on memorization than skill, which also gives it more replay value. I feel it's a shame it didn't get a sequel to flesh out everything that worked about it some more and maybe help give Solar Striker an identity. I think it would have been cool to see an alternate universe where we got a Super Solar Striker CD for the CD add-on to the Super Nintendo. I feel Nintendo really could have proved the console's capabilities with that. So in terms of what rating I would give it, and keep in mind this rating system is based solely on how much I would recommend it and nothing else, I would give it an 8. It's definitely one of the best shoot 'em ups for beginners, but some beginners may want something a little more consistently exciting, and if it feels somewhat patronizing to you as a newcomer, I can't blame you. This game definitely doesn't deserve its status of being forgotten and ignored, and despite Nintendo's complicated relationship with the genre, they, along with Minakuchi, did a good job with this game. I like it, obviously enough to make a video about it that's longer than the game itself. It's weirdly obscure for a game that I think everyone knows about, but no one really plays, and I think it is worth a playthrough. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this game interesting. If you somehow did the unthinkable and enjoyed this video and want to see more, check out my much better video on the game Ginga Fukai Densetsu Sapphire, a game that I'd recommend even more than this one. That's probably my favorite video I made this year, so I'd love to see it get more love. I put a lot of effort into it. Anyways, thank you to my patrons. Have a wonderful day.